Alright, guys, what's up? So, it's time for a new year and a new decade, and that means it's time for the roundup videos to start. Now, I could do, the same kind of roundup videos everybody else is doing in this day and age, the, favorite album, worst album kind of videos, but I thought I'd change it up a little and just do something maybe you haven't seen from 1,000 other YouTubers this year. And talk about the three albums that I think are the most criminally underrated. The three albums that I think have been the most unfairly maligned. And I have three albums that I'm going to be including in this list. And like I said, these are just the three albums that I think have gotten the most unfair amount of hate and criticism since their release. The first of these three records is one that I'm actually still fairly critical to. It definitely has its flaws, but I think a lot of people have tended to sort of overlook the good on the album because of those flaws, and that's Dream Theater's 2016 double album, The Astonishing. I'm not gonna lie and say that The Astonishing is an incredible record, but I do think that there are some really good musical moments on it that a lot of people just sort of tended to ignore because, maybe five or six of the songs on the record are incredibly boring. And I think that's really the only real crime with that particular album is that there is a bit of a stretch in the middle of like five or six songs that just really kind of drags the rest of the album down. But when you really kind of listen to the record and get into the rest of it, you still realize there's quite a bit of really good material on this record. I mean, of course, you have the three singles, The Gift of Music, Moment of Betrayal, and Our New World, which are three fantastic songs. There's still moments on the record like A New Beginning where Dream Theater still shows off its sort of noodly prog metal leanings in the context of this story that they're unraveling. And then there's still really good stretches of music that aren't just, something typical for Dream Theater. There's a section near the end on the second disc where we start to get into the sort of the battle of the story, like A Path That Divides through to My Last Farewell. And there's some really good moments in that, some really good theatrical sort of musical and even lyrical and sound effect moments that we don't really get in other Dream Theater albums. Clearly, The Astonishing was an attempt from Dream Theater to do something a little bit more on a grander scale, and while there are still some moments, especially on the second half of the first disc, where they didn't quite 100% achieve this, I still feel like a lot of the hatred that people levy towards this album has made some fans kind of ignorant to the other really good, really passionate material that Dream Theater is showing on this record. And I do wish that this album had been given more of a fair shake from fans and critics. Album number 2 on this list is an album that, honestly, I don't really think there's anything truly wrong with. It's actually a pretty good record all around, and I'm talking about Steven Wilson's To the Bone. I would say that this album's biggest crime is perhaps the fact that it came out after Hand Cannot Erase and The Raven That Refused to Sing. I mean, when you set up expectations with two of the genre's greatest albums, it's going to be hard to top that. I don't think anything Steven Wilson released after those two records would have been deemed adequate enough by the fans. Doesn't matter what kind of leaning that album might have taken. I think that anything after Hand Cannot Erase would have been looked down upon by at least some of the fans regardless. A lot of critics and fans kind of turn on this album as being sort of a pop record, but when you really think about it, there's only 2 tracks on the record that really sort of qualify for this, and even then they're still, pop by way of artists like Kate Bush, rather than, this isn't Steven Wilson turning into Britney Spears or Beyonce all of a sudden. These are still very much Steven Wilson tracks, Pariah and Permeating, they're still very much in the vein of what Steven Wilson has been known to do, and I still think that they are incredible songs. Overall, the album's musical structure is a lot simpler. The guitar work is not quite as prominent because, I mean, you don't have Guthrie Govan. Any album that doesn't have Guthrie Govan is going to pale in comparison to an album that does have Guthrie Govan. So, I mean, that album's going to be at a disadvantage no matter what style it takes. But there's still these really good stretches of music throughout the album. Still some really good typical Steven Wilson moments like The Same Asylum as Before, Detonation, and, I mean, these are all still really good songs. It's not like Steven Wilson took a massive dive in songwriting quality in this. They're just not King Crimson wannabe records like the last two records that came before it. So I do feel like there was a lot of unfair criticism towards To the Bone for being different than its previous two albums, and I think in a lot of ways there's even kind of a bit of a, these are simpler albums that hark a little bit more to what Steven Wilson was doing with Porcupine Tree. I would have thought Porcupine Tree fans would have loved To the Bone for being a little bit more straightforward and to the point, but it seems they didn't, and this album just really got kind of knocked around by Steven Wilson fans. And I think that's sad because there's a lot of really good music on that record. Alright, and the last album that I want to talk about, the last album that I think has been unfairly maligned in the 2010s, is the last album by Pink Floyd, The Endless River. I think that there's a lot of misconceptions about what this album is trying to be, and a lot of people are kind of reading it into it as if it were trying to be, the follow-up to The Division Bell. And it isn't. Of course, some fans know that this music has been around in some form or another since the early 90s, with Richard Wright's constant demoing of new ideas, new material, and some of these pieces have been sort of put together into a larger composition known as the Big Spliff. But it sort of needs to be said that this last Pink Floyd effort, I don't think it was ever meant to be, look at us, we're putting out a new album. I think that The Endless River was more of a, we just lost our good friend Rick, one of prog rock's most esteemed keyboard players, and, someone who has a lot of respect in the prog community. Let's put out a fitting tribute. And a lot of these pieces were written by him, or at least improvised by him, and were sort of loosely finished into this sort of ambient instrumental record. And it's very different from what you might be used to from Pink Floyd. There's only vocals on the last track, and, there isn't really much in terms of structure. It's all just very ambient, chilled out music. But I think that's how it should have been. I think that finishing these songs into some sort of, structured vocal-led production really kind of removes some of the essence of what Rick Wright contributed to this music. And this isn't meant to be a full-fledged album on the same vein as Division Bell or Dark Side of the Moon or The Wall. This is an album that's meant to be taken more as a tribute, a paean for their long-lost friend who, they wanted to commemorate in some real substantial way by giving his improvisations and his demos a bit of a voice, and to sort of polish them up, put them out to the fans and say, hey, look, here's a bunch of our favorite memories of Rick Wright around this particular time period, and we just want to put this out there for the fans. And of course we're going to give it the Pink Floyd label because it was recorded under the essence of what Pink Floyd was. And we also just think that it's a good thing to sort of prop up our fallen bandmate with, This is his legacy. If anything, it's sort of like the musical equivalent of, the picture board at someone's funeral. This is just like, look, here's our favorite memories. We wanted to share them with you. just going from that, it doesn't even really matter what the music is. I think that it's a very wholesome effort from Pink Floyd to do that. A rare wholesome effort from a band that's kind of been known for being at each other's throats over the years. But it also helps that there's a lot of really good material on this. Some of David Gilmour's most atmospheric playing, some really wonderful keyboard textures. I mean, if this were just any typical post-rock band's album, I think we probably would have seen this get some really good reviews, but the fact that it's Pink Floyd, people are expecting something like Dark Side of the Moon or The Division Bell or The Wall or something, and what they're getting is an album full of ambient instrumental music. It's very good ambient instrumental music, though, and I think that's where, I think some people who really kind of ignored that aspect of it or just really hated it for what it is are kind of missing out on. They're missing out on some really fantastic instrumental music. And I think overall it's a hell of a legacy for Pink Floyd to leave, especially given that, this is a band that's had a lot of turmoil over the years. And to end on such a wholesome note of like, hey, we're coming together to pay tribute to our friend. That's great. And of course, the last song on the record, Louder Than Words, is a proper song with lyrics, a structure, and it kind of serves as the ultimate swan song for Pink Floyd. And it's a really beautiful piece of music. And, I would be honored if someone put something out like that on a record commemorating me one day. I'd be truly honored to have something that gorgeous on a record of mine. So yeah, I think those are the 3 albums from the last decade that I wish had gotten more of a fair shake. 3 albums that I think were very unfairly maligned, very unfairly criticized and hated, even though there are some flaws to these 3 records, or they're not what fans expected. I do think that these are 3 records that are a lot better than people give them credit for, or that have much better moments than people say. And I think, if you're looking back on the 2010s and you're thinking of all the really terrible music, maybe try giving these 3 records another spin. See if there's still any life in them to you. Maybe you'll find yourself discovering new things. I mean, I really hated the Astonishing when it first came out, and the more I listen to it, the more I discover songs or passages or solos or something that actually kind of managed to captivate me a little bit more than they did the first listen. Same goes for To the Bone. I only just recently re-listened to The Endless River and went, wow, this is actually a lot better than I remember it being. So anyway, thank you for watching this video. I hope to continue putting out more content like this in the future. And Happy New Year to anybody who's watching, who's subscribed. I hope to kind of get back into this in the new year. That would be wonderful. Anyway, take care, guys.